I bought a Goth Beastwoman to save her, but now she won't leave my side. Silas stood in the heart of the midnight bazaar, his boots clicking against the damp cobblestones of Vesper Prime. This world never saw the sun, held in a permanent state of violet dusk that made every shadow look like a predator. He adjusted the collar of his heavy wool overcoat, feeling the weight of the credit chips in his inner pocket. They were everything he had earned over 10 years of hauling freight across the rim. Why would a man trade his entire future for a girl who looked like she wanted to tear his throat out? Silas asked himself that as he watched the light catch the silver chains binding the Beastwoman. He did not have an answer, only a feeling in his gut that leaving her here would cost him more than his credits ever could. Ahead, a crowd gathered around a raised iron platform. The air smelled of wet stone and the sharp tang of cooling metal. Silas pushed through the throng of merchants and scavengers until he reached the front. On the stage stood a cage, and inside it was a creature that did not belong in a cage. She was a Beastwoman, a wolfkin with fur the color of a stormy night and eyes that burned like violet stars. She wore a tattered black lace corset and a shredded Victorian skirt that had seen better days. Her heavy platform combat boots were planted firmly on the cold iron floor, and despite the chains around her wrists, she stood with a spine made of steel. 50,000 credits, the auctioneer shouted, his voice echoing off the surrounding stone arches. Do I hear 60? Sterling, a noble with a face like a slapped ham and a coat made of imported silk, stepped forward. He held a cane topped with a gold skull. 60,000, he sneered, glancing at the captive with a look of predatory ownership. She will look quite striking guarding my estate in the Highlands. Silas felt a cold knot of anger tighten in his chest. He knew Sterling. The man was a collector of broken things, and he took great pleasure in the breaking. Silas looked at the woman in the cage. She was not looking at the crowd. She was looking at the horizon, her jaw set in a line of pure defiance. 70,000, Silas called out. The crowd went silent. Sterling turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Silas. You are a simple freighter captain, Silas. You do not have that kind of capital. I have enough, Silas replied, his voice steady. 70,000. Sterling laughed, a dry, grating sound. 80,000. Do not play games with your betters, merchant. Silas reached into his utility belt and pulled out a small, high-density data drive. This contains the deeds to my warehouse on the port and the title for my ship. It is worth over 100,000 credits in liquid assets. I bid the entire lot. The auctioneer blinked, his greed warring with his surprise. That is a substantial offer. Sterling stepped towards Silas, his face turning a mottled shade of red. You would give up your livelihood for a stray animal. You are a fool. She is not an animal, Silas said, and I would rather be a fool than a man who buys souls to decorate his garden. The auctioneer hammered his gavel against the iron railing. Sold to the captain. Sterling spat on the ground near Silas's boots. You have made a very expensive mistake, Silas. Vesper Prime is a small world. You will find that without your ship or your warehouse, your life is worth very little. He turned on his heel and disappeared into the gloom, his guards trailing behind him like shadows. Silas ignored him and climbed the steps to the stage. He took the heavy iron key from the auctioneer and walked toward the cage. The woman watched him, her ears twitching atop her head. She did not cower. She did not beg. She simply waited. He slid the key into the lock and turned it. The heavy door swung open with a groan of protesting metal. Silas reached out, but he did not grab her. He held the key out to her instead. You are free, he said. There is a transport leaving for the neutral zones in an hour. Take whatever credits I have left in this pouch and get as far away from Sterling as you can. The Beastwoman did not move. She looked at the open door, then at the key, and finally at Silas. Her voice was low, like the growl of distant thunder. Why did you do it? Silas shrugged, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. I do not like cages, and I do not like Sterling. She stepped out of the cage, her height nearly matching his. The scent of rain and something wild clung to her. She looked down at his hands, seeing the calluses of a man who worked for a living. You gave up everything you own. Your ship, your home. Why? Because you looked like you were waiting for someone to do the right thing, Silas said. Now go, before Sterling sends his men back to see what I have left. He turned to walk away, his mind already racing with how he was going to survive the night without a credit to his name. He had reached the edge of the platform when he felt a heavy hand on his shoulder. He turned to find the Beastwoman standing right behind him. My name is Sabrina, she said. Silas nodded. I am Silas. It was nice to meet you, Sabrina. Good luck. He tried to walk again, but she moved with a speed that blurred his vision, stepping in front of him to block his path. Her violet eyes were intense, searching his face. On my world, a life debt is not a currency to be traded. It is a bond of blood and honor. You have bought my soul from the darkness. I did not buy you to keep you, Sabrina, Silas said, trying to keep his voice gentle. I bought you so you could be free. Sabrina shook her head, her dark hair swaying. Freedom is a hollow word when you have nowhere to go. My pack is gone. My home is a graveyard. You are the only person in this sector who saw me as more than a beast. My honor will not allow me to leave the side of the man who sacrificed his future for mine. Silas looked at her, truly looked at her. She was tall, powerful, and clearly dangerous, but there was a flicker of something soft behind the gothic makeup and the sharp teeth. He realized then that his quiet, predictable life as a merchant was officially over. I cannot pay you, he said. I do not even have a ship anymore. Then we will find a way to get it back, Sabrina replied. I am your guardian now, Silas. Where you go, I go. He looked out at the darkening streets of the bazaar. Sterling was still out there. The noble would not let an insult like this go unpunished. He looked back at Sabrina, who stood like a sentinel at his side, her claws glinting in the twilight. It looks like things are about to get complicated, Silas muttered. Sabrina leaned in, a small, fierce smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Complicated is better than dead, and with me at your side, you are very hard to kill. Silas felt a strange warmth in his chest, a spark of hope he had not felt in years. He did not know how they would survive the night or how he would ever get his ship back, but for the first time in a long time, he was not alone. Together, they stepped off the platform and vanished into the shadows of the bazaar. The rain on Vesper Prime was more like a heavy mist that clung to the skin. Silas navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the lower bazaar with a practiced ease, though the weight of his empty pockets felt heavier than any cargo he had ever hauled. Sabrina moved with a silent grace that contrasted sharply with the heavy thud of his own boots. She did not ask where they were going. She simply existed in his shadow, her ears twitching at every distant sound. Stop, Sabrina whispered. Silas froze. He reached for the empty holster at his hip, a reflex from his days in the colonial militia. He remembered too late that he had sold his sidearm 3 months ago to keep his ship fueled. Sabrina did not need a weapon. Her hands were curled into loose fists, her claws slightly extended. 3 men, she said, her voice a low vibration. They have been following since we left the auction block. Silas looked at a polished piece of scrap metal leaning against a wall, using the reflection to peer behind them. He saw the flicker of a red coat. Sterling's men. The noble was not waiting for tomorrow to reclaim his pride. Can we lose them in the vents? Silas asked. They are too close for a chase, Sabrina replied. They intend to corner us before we reach the main transit line. Silas pointed toward a narrow gap between 2 crumbling warehouses. Then we choose the corner. Follow me. He ducked into the gap, the smell of recycled air and old grease filling his lungs. This part of the bazaar was a graveyard of rusted machinery and forgotten dreams. Silas led Sabrina toward a stack of corrugated shipping containers that had been fused together by decades of corrosive rain. He knew this layout. He had spent enough nights hiding from port authorities here to know every blind spot. He stopped behind a heavy coolant regulator that leaked a slow, rhythmic drip of emerald fluid. "They are coming," Sabrina whispered. She stayed low, her violet eyes scanning the darkness with a clarity Silas envied. "They have weapons, kinetic batons and at least one pulse pistol." Silas checked the weight of a heavy iron pipe lying near his feet. It was cold and pitted with age, but it would hold. He didn't want to fight, but Sterling was the kind of man who viewed a lost auction as a personal heist. The noble wouldn't stop until his prize was back in chains or broken beyond repair. "I have a plan," Silas said, his voice barely a breath. "There is a pressure release valve on the main line 10 feet behind them. If I can hit the manual override, the steam will blind them for 30 seconds. That is our window." Sabrina turned her head, her ears twitching. "I can reach the valve faster than you." "No," Silas countered firmly. "You are the one they want to capture. If they see you move, they will fire. I am just a failed merchant to them. They will underestimate me. When the steam hits, you take the two on the left. Leave the one with the pistol to me." She looked at him, her gaze lingering on the scars on his hands. "You would risk your life for a debt you do not owe." "I told you," Silas said. "I did not buy you to own you. Now get ready." The sound of heavy boots echoed against the metal walls. 3 shadows elongated across the floor, cast by the flickering sodium lights of the upper bazaar. Garin, Sterling's primary enforcer, stepped into the clearing. He was a broad-shouldered man with a cybernetic eye that glowed a dull, menacing crimson. "Come out, Captain," Garin called out. His voice was like grinding stones. "You are a long way from your ship. Oh wait, I forgot. You do not have a ship anymore. You traded it for a stray dog that does not even know your name." Silas stepped out from behind the regulator, hands raised but empty of the pipe he had hidden in his sleeve. "I am right here, Garin. Sterling got what he wanted. I am broke and grounded. Why follow us?" "The noble does not like being embarrassed," Garin said, leveling a pulse pistol at Silas's chest. "He wants the girl, and he wants you to watch while we take her. It is a matter of etiquette." Silas took a calculated step toward the wall. Etiquette was never Sterling's strong suit. Garin sneered and signaled his men to fan out. Silas saw the moment the enforcer's finger tightened on the trigger. He lunged to the right, slamming his palm into the manual override lever of the steam line. A deafening roar filled the gap as pressurized vapor hissed out in a massive, white cloud. The alley vanished in a wall of heat and mist. Garin swore, firing a blind shot that hissed past Silas's ear and melted a hole in a nearby crate. Sabrina moved like a blur of shadow and violet light. She did not roar or scream. She was a silent predator. Silas heard the crunch of a kinetic baton hitting the floor and the heavy thud of a body slamming into a container. Silas ignored the stinging heat of the steam on his face. He kept his eyes low, looking for the glow of Garin's cybernetic eye. There, a pinpoint of red through the white haze. Silas charged, staying low to the ground. He didn't use the pipe. He used his shoulder, driving all his weight into Garin's midsection. The enforcer gasped, the air leaving his lungs in a sharp wheeze. Silas grabbed Garin's wrist, twisting the pulse pistol upward just as it discharged. The bolt hit the ceiling, showering them in sparks. Silas followed through with a sharp elbow to the man's jaw, feeling the solid connection. Garin slumped, the pistol clattering to the wet ground. Silas scooped up the weapon and spun around. The steam was beginning to dissipate. Sabrina stood over the other 2 men. They were not dead, but they were not getting up. She looked at Silas, her chest heaving, her expression unreadable. "You move well for a merchant," she said. "I was a militiaman before I was a captain," Silas replied, checking the charge on the pistol. "We need to go before the rest of the squad arrives. This was just the scouting party." They moved quickly through the labyrinth of the lower bazaar, heading toward a sector known as the Drips. It was a place where the law didn't go because there was nothing left worth stealing. Silas led her to a door marked with a faded blue sun. He knocked a specific rhythm. A small slat opened. A pair of sharp, intelligent eyes peered out. "Silas, I heard you lost your mind at the auction." "Open up, Monica," Silas said. "I need a favor and I have a pulse pistol to pay for it." The door hissed open. Monica was a short, wiry woman with grease-stained overalls and a crown of tangled black hair. She looked at Sabrina and whistled low. "So the rumors are true. You really did trade the Star Runner for a wolfkin." "She is a person, Monica," Silas said, stepping inside and pulling Sabrina with him. "And she is the reason Sterling is going to tear this sector apart tonight." Monica locked the door and engaged the magnetic deadbolts. "Well, you picked a fine time to become a hero. Sterling is not just angry about the bid. He had a buyer lined up on the planet of Orithia, a high-ranking official who does not like being kept waiting." Sabrina stood in the center of the room, her presence making the small workshop feel cramped. "Why does an official on Orithia want me? I am just a scout from the northern wilds." Monica wiped her hands on a rag and looked at Sabrina with a mix of pity and concern. "You are not just a scout. You are the last one who knows the coordinates to the hidden vaults of the old empire. Sterling found your lineage records. He did not buy you for a pet. He bought you for a map." Silas felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He looked at Sabrina. "Did you know this?" "I knew my elders spoke of a great responsibility," Sabrina said softly. "But I thought it was a myth to keep us disciplined. I did not know it was written in my blood." Silas turned to Monica. "Can you get us off-world? I have no ship, no credits, and half the planetary guard is likely on Sterling's payroll." Monica sighed and pointed to a tarp in the back of the hangar. "I have a long-range shuttle. It is not the Star Runner. It has no galley, the life support is temperamental, and the hyperdrive sounds like a bag of nails in a blender. But it is fueled." "Why help us?" Silas asked. "Because Sterling killed my brother over a cargo dispute 3 years ago," Monica said, her voice hardening. "And because I want to see the look on his face when a broke captain and a free woman vanish right under his nose." Silas looked at Sabrina. She was watching him, her violet eyes searching his for any sign of regret. He had lost everything for her, and now he was asking her to trust him with the only thing she had left, her secret. "We leave tonight," Silas said. Sabrina stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, a stark contrast to the cold metal of the bazaar. "Thank you, Silas." He covered her hand with his own. "Do not thank me yet. We have a long way to go before we are clear of Vesper Prime." As Monica began the pre-flight sequence, Silas stood by the small viewport, watching the rain wash over the grime of the city. He had no ship and no future as a merchant, but for the first time in years he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He looked at Sabrina, who was helping Monica check the fuel lines, and a small, determined smile touched his lips. They were no longer just a captain and a captive. They were a crew. And Sterling was about to find out that a man with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous man in the galaxy. The shuttle rattled as it tore through the thick, acidic clouds of Vesper Prime. Silas gripped the flight yokes, his knuckles white against the worn leather grips. Beside him, Sabrina watched the long-range scanners with a focus that seemed almost supernatural. She did not blink, her violet eyes tracking every pulse of light on the screen. Monica was buried in the aft compartment, her shouting barely audible over the roar of the atmospheric thrusters as she coaxed the aging reactor into a stable cycle. "We have company," Sabrina said. Her voice was a low growl of warning. "2 interceptors just cleared the high ridge. They are not using standard patrol frequencies." "Sterling," Silas muttered. He flipped a series of toggles, cutting the external lights and shifting power to the rear shields. "He is not going to let us leave without a fight." "He will try to disable the engines," Sabrina observed. "He wants me alive. The vaults cannot be opened without the blood of my kin." Silas glanced at her, a sharp flicker of realization crossing his face. "So it is not just a map. You are the key." I am the only key left, she replied. Her hand moved to the hilt of a short blade she had recovered from Monica's workshop. I will not be taken back to a cage, Silas. You have my word on that, he said. He kicked the thrusters into an overdrive cycle, the sudden acceleration pinning them back into their seats. The shuttle groaned under the stress, the metal skins screaming as they hit the upper thermosphere. Behind them, two streaks of crimson light cut through the dark sky. The interceptors were closing the gap, their weapon systems locking onto the shuttle's heat signature. Monica, I need the jump drive ready in 10 seconds, Silas shouted into the comms. I am working on it, the engineer yelled back. The alignment is off by 3 degrees. If I fire it now, we might end up inside a star. Better a star than Sterling's dungeon, Silas said. Adjust on the fly. I am going to give them a difficult target. He threw the shuttle into a violent spiral, dodging a burst of plasma that scorched the port side plating. The ship bucked, alarms blaring as the shield integrity dropped. Sabrina reached out, her hand steadying Silas's arm. Her touch was firm, a grounding force amidst the chaos of the cockpit. She pointed to a cluster of orbital debris ahead, the remains of an old refueling station. There, she said, if you can put that mass between us and their sensors, Monica will have the time she needs. Silas nodded, his eyes narrowing. He trusted her instincts. He dove the shuttle toward the wreckage, weaving through jagged shards of frozen steel and shattered solar panels. The interceptors hesitated, their pilots unwilling to risk a high-speed collision in the debris field. It was the opening they needed. Now, Monica, Silas roared. The world outside the viewport vanished into a blur of white light. The violent shaking stopped instantly, replaced by the eerie, silent pressure of slipstream travel. They were no longer in the skies of Vesper Prime. They were in the void between worlds, moving faster than any conventional pursuer could track. Silas let out a long breath, his shoulders finally dropping. He leaned back, wiping sweat from his forehead. We are clear, for now. Sabrina did not relax. She remained upright, her gaze fixed on the shifting light of the slipstream. You saved me again, Silas. Your ship is gone, your credits are spent, and now you are a fugitive. Why? Silas looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the strength hidden beneath the scars of her captivity. Because I spent my whole life trading things that didn't matter, he said. I decided it was time to invest in something that did. Sabrina turned toward him, her expression softening. My people believe that a life debt is not a burden but a bridge. You have walked across it. I will follow you to the vaults of the old empire and beyond. They spent the next few hours in the relative quiet of the transit, preparing for the journey ahead. Monica emerged from the engine room, covered in grease but wearing a triumphant grin. She had managed to patch the cooling lines using a bit of salvaged resin and sheer willpower. The drive will hold until we reach the Morrow system, Monica said, wiping her hands on a rag. But we need a place to go to ground. Every port in this sector reports to the Merchant Guild, and Sterling has them in his pocket. I know a place, Silas said, pulling up a star chart, a world called Orindar. It is a rogue planet not tethered to any sun, kept warm by its own volcanic core. It is a haven for those who do not wish to be found. Sabrina studied the coordinates. It is far. We will need supplies. We will find them, Silas promised. As Monica went back to monitor the reactor, Silas and Sabrina sat together in the dim light of the cockpit. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was the silence of two people who had found a common purpose in a galaxy that had tried to throw them away. Tell me about the vaults, Silas asked quietly. Why does Sterling want them so badly? It is not just gold or technology, Sabrina said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The old empire did not just build machines. They built legacies. The vaults contain the genetic seeds of 1,000 worlds preserved before the Great Collapse. My people were the guardians of that life. Sterling does not want to save the galaxy. He wants to own its future. He wants to decide which worlds are allowed to breathe and which are left to wither. Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of space. Then we are not just running, we are protecting the future. Yes, Sabrina said. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his. You are a good man, Silas, a man of honor. I am just a merchant who found a better cause, he replied, closing his hand around hers. The shuttle surged forward, a lonely spark in the vast darkness, carrying the last hope of a fallen empire toward the hidden fires of Orindar. They were a crew of 3, bound by secrets and a shared defiance, heading toward a destination that was not on any map. For the first time in his life, Silas did not care about the profit at the end of the voyage. He cared about the woman beside him and the promise of a universe where no one would ever have to wear chains again. As the bioluminescent displays of the cockpit bathed them in a soft, emerald glow, Sabrina leaned her head against Silas's shoulder. The journey was long and the dangers were many, but in the heart of the void, they had found a warmth that no star could provide. They were no longer running from a past of loss. They were flying toward a future they would build together, one light year at a time. The shuttle dipped low over the jagged obsidian ridges of Orindar. This world did not orbit a star. It drifted through the cold void, warmed only by the glowing magma veins that pulsed beneath its crust like the veins of a titan. Lavender mists clung to the canyons, illuminated from below by the subterranean fires. Monica gripped the flight yokes, her brow furrowed as she scanned the terrain for the specific energy signature Sabrina had described. There, Monica said, pointing toward a massive spire that rose like a jagged tooth from a frozen lake of glass. The spire of eons. My sensors are picking up an ancient shielding frequency. It is definitely the place. Silas stood behind her, his hand resting on the back of Sabrina's chair. He could feel the tension in the cabin. Sabrina sat perfectly still, her violet eyes fixed on the approaching monolith. To her, this was not just a destination. It was the weight of 1,000 fallen worlds and the ghosts of her ancestors calling her home. Are you ready for this? Silas asked softly. Sabrina turned her head, her gaze softening as it met his. I have spent my life as a curiosity or a slave, Silas. For the first time, I am the one with the power to choose. I am ready because you are here. The shuttle settled onto a flat plateau of volcanic rock. As the ramp hissed open, the air of Orindar rushed in, smelling of sulfur and ancient dust. Silas stepped out first, his hand on the grip of his pulse pistol. He scanned the horizon, his instincts screaming that they were not alone. The silence of the rogue planet was heavy, broken only by the distant roar of a thermal vent. They approached the base of the spire. A massive door of matte black metal was recessed into the stone, devoid of handles or keyholes. It was smooth, cold, and indifferent to the passage of time. Sabrina stepped forward, her boots crunching on the gravel. She placed her hand against the center of the door. A thin line of white light traced the of her palm. A low vibration rumbled through the ground, a deep groan of ancient machinery waking from a long slumber. The door did not slide or swing. It dissolved into a shimmer of microscopic particles, revealing a hallway lined with crystalline pillars. It is beautiful, Monica whispered, stepping inside. Stop right there, a cold, familiar voice echoed across the plateau. Silas spun around, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. A sleek, silver interceptor had landed silently behind a nearby ridge, its cloaking field shimmering as it deactivated. Sterling stepped off the craft, flanked by 6 armored guards carrying heavy disruptor rifles. The noble looked out of place in the rugged wilderness, his silk robes fluttering in the wind. Did you really think I would let my investment simply walk away? Sterling asked, his lips curling into a sneer. I have had a tracer on Monica's workshop for months. I was simply waiting for someone to lead me to the prize. You are not taking her, Silas said, his voice level and dangerous. You have enough wealth to buy a system, Sterling. Leave her alone. Wealth is fleeting, Sterling replied, gesturing toward the spire. The biological seeds inside that vault are the currency of the future. I can terraform dead rocks into paradises. I can hold the life of the galaxy in my palm. Step aside, Captain. You are a freighter pilot, not a hero. Do not die for a creature that belongs in a cage. Silas did not move. He stood between the guards and the woman he had risked everything to save. I might just be a pilot, he said, but I know the difference between a man and a monster. You see a prize. I see a soul. Sterling signaled his guards. Kill the man and the engineer. Bring the girl to me alive. The plateau erupted into chaos. Silas dove behind a basalt pillar, returning fire as blue bolts of energy hissed through the air. Monica scrambled for cover behind the shuttle's landing gear, pulling a modified welding torch from her belt and overcharging its power cell. Sabrina did not hide. She stood in the entrance of the vault, her eyes glowing with a sudden, fierce intensity. The genetic resonance of the spire was flowing through her, unlocking more than just a door. She reached out, her fingers splaying against the crystalline pillars. The spire responded. A pulse of kinetic energy rippled outward from the entrance, hitting the guards like a physical wave. They were thrown backward, their armor sparking as the vault's internal security systems interfaced with Sabrina's will. Silas used the opening to move. He sprinted toward the nearest guard, kicking the rifle from his hands and flooring him with a precise strike to the temple. He caught the falling rifle and turned it on the remaining enforcers, his movements calculated and efficient. He was a man who had survived the roughest ports in the sector, and he fought with the desperation of someone who had finally found something worth keeping. Sterling backed away toward his ship, his face pale. "This is impossible. You are a slave." "I am the key," Sabrina shouted, her voice echoing with a power that shook the very air. "And you are nothing." She raised her hand, and the ground beneath Sterling's feet began to shift. The volcanic glass shattered as a containment field rose around him, trapping him in a shimmering cage of light. He pounded against the walls, but the technology of the old empire was far beyond his understanding. Silas reached Sabrina's side, breathing hard. "Is he dealt with?" "For now," she said, her chest heaving. "The vault will hold him until the authorities from the inner rim arrive to collect him. I have sent a signal with his coordinates and the records of his crimes." Monica emerged from behind the shuttle, wiping soot from her forehead. "Well, that was more excitement than I usually like with my morning coffee. What is inside, Sabrina?" Sabrina turned toward the heart of the spire. A central chamber opened up, filled with millions of tiny glass vials suspended in a lattice of golden light. Each one held the genetic blueprint of a plant, an animal, or a forest from a time before the Great Collapse. It was a library of life, a chance to heal the scarred worlds of the galaxy. "It is a beginning," Sabrina said softly. Silas walked to the center of the room, looking up at the vast collection. All this time, people thought the vault held gold or weapons. They never imagined it was just the chance to start over. Sabrina walked to him, taking his hand. "My people were the guardians of this place. We were never meant to be ornaments in a noble's court. We were meant to be the gardeners of the stars." "What happens now?" Monica asked, leaning against a pillar. "We cannot exactly pack all this into a freighter." "We do not have to," Sabrina said. "The spire is a transmitter. Now that it is unlocked, I can send these blueprints to any world with a receiving station. We can give this gift to everyone for free. No one will ever have to starve on a desert world again." Silas looked at her, seeing the joy radiating from her face. "And what about you? Your debt is paid, Sabrina. You are free to go anywhere." Sabrina stepped closer, her violet eyes searching his. "I told you before, Silas. My honor bound me to you, but my heart has made its own choice. I do not want to go anywhere if you are not there with me. The galaxy is a big place, and it is going to need people to make sure these seeds are planted in the right soil." Silas smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. "I suppose a captain always needs a reliable guardian. and a partner. Monica cleared her throat, a smirk playing on her lips. I hate to break up the moment, but we should probably get moving before more of Sterling's friends show up. I have got a shuttle to fix and a whole lot of data to transmit. They walked back to the shuttle together, leaving the spire glowing brightly against the dark Orindar sky. The rogue planet was no longer a place of shadows and secrets. It was a beacon. As the shuttle lifted off, leaving the obsidian ridges behind, Silas sat in the pilot's seat. Sabrina sat beside him, her hand resting firmly on his. They were no longer running from a past of loss or chains. They were flying toward a future they had earned, one world at a time. The void was no longer empty. It was full of light, and for the first time in his life, Silas knew exactly where he was going. He was home. The shuttle vibration felt different now that they carried the weight of 1,000 worlds in their data banks. Silas kept his hand steady on the flight yoke, his eyes scanning the scanners as the dark expanse of the void shifted into the dull, bruised purple of the Calitho's system. Beside him, Sabrina sat with her back straight, her gaze fixed on the viewscreen. She looked less like a captive and more like a queen reclaiming a lost kingdom. The violet markings on her skin seemed to glow with a soft, rhythmic light that pulsed in time with the ship core. Monica leaned over the center console, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. We are picking up 3 signatures near the primary relay station on the moon of Vora. They are not local patrols, Silas. Those are Ethelgard heavy cruisers. Sterling might be stuck in the spire, but his corporate backers are already moving to intercept the signal. Silas tightened his grip. They want to put a price tag on the restoration. If they control the relay, they control who gets to breathe and who stays in the dust. We are not letting that happen. How do we get past 3 cruisers in a patched-up shuttle? Sabrina asked, her voice low and focused. Her hand moved to the hilt of the blade she had reclaimed from the spire. We cannot outgun them. We do not have to outgun them, Silas said, his mind racing through years of freighter maneuvers. We just have to outthink them. Monica, can you slave the transmission frequency to the ship's heat signature? Monica looked up, a grin spreading across her face. You want to make them think the data is the engine wash. It is risky. If they lock onto us, they get the data and a target at the same time. It is the only way to get close enough to the relay to hardwire the upload, Silas replied. Sabrina, I need you to go to the rear sensor array. When we hit the gravity well of Vora, I need you to manually vent the coolant. It will create a localized cloud that will mask our profile for exactly 90 seconds. Sabrina nodded, standing up with a fluid grace. I will not fail you, Silas. She paused by his seat, her hand lingering on his shoulder for a brief moment. The warmth of her touch grounded him against the cold reality of the odds they faced. Silas watched her disappear into the hold before turning back to the controls. We are entering the shadow of the moon in 5 minutes, Monica warned. The cruisers are spreading out. They are setting up a net. Silas adjusted the thrusters, feeling the tug of the moon's gravity. He steered the shuttle into a steep dive, using the jagged silhouette of the lunar mountains to hide their approach. The ship groaned under the pressure, the hull plating screaming as they hit the thin atmosphere of Vora. Now Sabrina, Silas commanded into the comms. Behind them, a massive plume of supercooled gas erupted from the shuttle, blossoming into a shimmering veil. On the scanners, the shuttle's signature vanished, replaced by a chaotic bloom of white noise. The Ethelgard cruisers adjusted their course, firing blind probes into the cloud, but Silas was already pulling the ship into a tight roll, skimming the surface of the moon. The relay station appeared ahead, a needle of steel and light piercing the gray lunar dust. It was an ancient structure, built by the same hands that had crafted the spire of eons. I see the docking port, Monica whispered, but the shield is still active. I cannot bypass it from here. I will handle the shield, Sabrina's voice came through the speakers. I can feel the station. It is calling to the key. Silas brought the shuttle in fast, the landing strut skidding across the metallic platform of the relay. He did not wait for the engines to cool. He grabbed his pulse pistol and met Sabrina at the airlock. She looked transformed, her eyes burning with an intensity that made the air around her feel heavy. "Stay with the ship, Monica," Silas ordered. "Keep the engines hot. If we do not make it back in 10 minutes, blast the relay. Nobody gets this data if we cannot give it to everyone." Monica gave a sharp nod, her face pale but determined. "Just get it done, Captain." Silas and Sabrina vaulted out of the airlock and onto the platform. The air was thin and tasted of recycled oxygen and ancient dust. 2 security droids detached from the station walls, their red sensors locking onto the intruders. Before they could level their weapons, Sabrina was a blur of purple and black. She moved with a ferocity that was beautiful and terrifying, her blades shearing through the metal chassis of the first droid, while her boots crushed the processor of the second. Silas fired a neutralizing shot at a third droid emerging from the shadows, his aim true. He moved to the terminal, but the interface was a language he did not recognize. It was a series of shifting geometric shapes and light pulses. Sabrina stepped forward, placing her palms against the cold surface of the console. The terminal responded instantly, the shapes aligning into a golden crest. She closed her eyes, her breath hitching as the data began to flow through her. "It is so much," she whispered. "The maps of the old forests, the codes for the rain, it is all here." "Upload it," Silas said, glancing back at the sky. One of the cruisers was turning, its massive prow beginning to glow with the light of a charging main cannon. "They have spotted us." Sabrina did not move. Her body was rigid, her skin glowing brighter as the transmission began. A beam of pure white light shot upward from the tip of the relay, piercing the darkness and scattering into a million shimmering threads that raced toward the stars. The cruiser fired. The blast hit the lunar surface a mile away, the shockwave rattling the station and nearly throwing Silas off his feet. He grabbed a railing, his eyes never leaving Sabrina. She was the bridge between a dead past and a living future, and he would die before he let that bridge break. Another shot, closer this time. The ground beneath them groaned. "It is finished," Sabrina said, her voice echoing with a strange, melodic resonance. "The broadcast is universal. No one can stop it now." She collapsed into his arms, the glow fading from her skin. Silas scooped her up, her weight familiar and precious. He ran for the shuttle as the cruiser leveled its guns for a direct hit. He threw her into the airlock just as Monica ignited the main thrusters. The shuttle roared to life, leaping off the platform seconds before the relay station was vaporized by a concentrated thermal beam. Silas tumbled into the pilot's seat, his heart hammering against his ribs. "We got it out," Monica shouted over the roar of the engines. "Every world in the sector is receiving the blueprints. The Ethelgard ships are breaking formation. They know they lost." Silas looked at the screen. The white light from the relay was still visible, a lingering ghost of hope spreading across the system. He looked back at Sabrina, who was sitting up on the floor of the hold, breathing hard. She looked at her hands, then at him. "They will come for us," she said softly. "The people who wanted to own the stars will not forget this." "Let them come," Silas said, reaching out to help her up. "We are not just a captain and a guardian anymore. We are the start of something they cannot understand." He pulled her close, the adrenaline fading into a deep, quiet warmth. They had traded a life of safety for a life of purpose, and as the shuttle cleared the atmosphere of Vora and headed for the lush, awakening world of Calithos, Silas knew he would make the same choice 1,000 times over. The galaxy was no longer a graveyard of empires. It was a garden, and they were the ones who had finally brought the rain. Sabrina leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand interlaced with his. For the first time since he had found her in that iron cage, her eyes were peaceful. The debt was paid, but the bond was just beginning. They watched the gray world below begin to shimmer with the first hints of green, a promise kept in the silence of the stars. The shuttle slammed into the upper atmosphere of Calithos, the heat shields glowing a fierce orange against the black of space. Silas kept his hands steady on the yoke, feeling every vibration of the aging craft. Monica was a blur of motion in the co-pilot seat, her fingers dancing across the holographic displays to recalibrate the thrusters for a planetary landing. Behind them, Sabrina watched the sensors, her eyes reflecting the shifting colors of the world below. It was a planet of deep violets and vibrant teals, a place where the old empire had once stored its greatest treasures. Now, it was the first world to receive the restoration transmission from the lunar relay. "We have 3 signatures on our tail," Monica said, her voice cutting through the roar of the descent. "They are Ethelgard interceptors. It looks like Sterling's lieutenants aren't ready to give up just because their boss is locked in a vault on a rogue planet." Silas glanced at the tactical map. The ships were closing fast, their weapons prepped to fire. He did not feel the cold dread that used to haunt him back at the Midnight Bazaar. He felt a sharp, clear sense of purpose. "They are chasing a ghost," Silas said. "The data is already out there. It is in every terminal from here to the core." "They want revenge," Sabrina said, her voice low and resonant. "And they want to stop us from reaching the primary nursery on the surface. If they cannot own the life, they will burn it." "Not on my watch," Silas replied. "Monica, can we dump the remaining coolant? We need another screen." Monica shook her head. "No, we used it all at Vora, but we have something else. The transmission pulse left a residual charge in our jump capacitors. If I vent it through the rear exhaust, it will create an electromagnetic wake that should scramble their targeting." "Do it," Silas ordered. The shuttle bucked as Monica threw a series of switches. A brilliant flare of white energy erupted from the engines, trailing behind them like a comet tail. The interceptors behind them swerved, their sensors blinded by the sudden surge of power. Silas took the opportunity to dive, pushing the nose down into a steep banking turn that utilized the planet's gravity to slingshot them toward the southern continent. The interceptors tried to follow, but the atmospheric friction began to tear at their lighter hulls. One by one, their signatures blinked off the screen as they were forced to break off and return to orbit. "We are clear," Monica breathed, wiping sweat from her brow. "We are actually going to make it." Silas leveled the shuttle, the turbulent air smoothing out as they reached the lower altitudes. Below them, the landscape was breathtaking. Great crystalline forests stretched toward the horizon, their leaves shimmering with a biological luminescence that had been dormant for centuries. Because of the broadcast, the planetary systems were waking up. The air was rich and heavy with the scent of blooming flora and damp earth. "Find us a clearing near the central spire," Silas said. Sabrina moved to the front, leaning between the 2 seats. "Look at the colors," she whispered. "I remember the stories my elders told. They said Calithos was the heart of the sector. To see it breathing again is a miracle." "It is not a miracle," Silas said, looking back at her. "It is what happens when people stop being afraid of what they cannot control." They landed the shuttle in a broad meadow of soft, silver grass. When the hatch hissed open, the air that rushed in was sweet and cool. It carried none of the metallic tang of the freighter or the stale, recycled oxygen of the bazaar. It was the smell of a beginning. Monica stepped out first, her boots sinking into the lush ground. She laughed, a sound of pure relief, and started toward a nearby stream that glittered with clear water. "I am going to build a workshop here," she shouted over her shoulder. "A real one. No more scrap yards and hidden basements." Silas and Sabrina followed more slowly. They stood at the edge of the ramp, looking out over the valley. The spire of Calithos rose in the distance, a graceful needle of white stone that acted as the primary distribution hub for the ecological systems of the planet. "The life debt is settled," Silas said quietly, turning to Sabrina. "You saved us back at the Spire of Eons. You saved the whole sector by sending that data. You do not owe me anything anymore." Sabrina looked at him, her violet eyes soft. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. Her grip was strong and warm. "You still do not understand, Silas. I did not stay because of a debt. I stayed because you were the first person who saw me as someone worth saving, not something to be owned." Silas felt a weight he had not realized he was carrying finally lift. He looked at their joined hands, then back at the world they had helped revive. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, and there were still people who would try to reclaim the power they had lost. But for the first time in his life, Silas was not running. "What happens now?" he asked. Sabrina smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that transformed her face. "Now we protect the garden. We travel to the other worlds that received the signal. They will need help understanding the technology. They will need guardians." Silas nodded. He thought about his old freighter and how he had traded it for a single life. It was the best bargain he had ever made. "Then we better get to work," he said. They walked together into the tall grass, the silver blades parting around them. In the distance, the first birds of the new era took flight, their songs filling the air with a melody that felt like a promise kept. The sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the meadow, but there was no fear of the dark. The stars were coming out, and for Silas and Sabrina, they had never looked brighter. Monica joined them a moment later, holding a handful of small, glowing seeds she had found by the water. "These are the blueprints," she said, her eyes wide with wonder. "They are already growing. The whole planet is responding." "It is spreading to the next system too," Silas noted, checking a handheld scanner. The relay on Vora acted as a catalyst. The corporate blockades will not be able to stop the growth. You cannot fence in a forest that covers the sky. Sabrina leaned her head against Silas's shoulder. He put his arm around her, drawing her close. They were no longer a captain and a captive, or even just a crew. They were the architects of a new age, and as they stood on the soil of Calithos, they knew their journey was far from over. It was simply changing direction. The era of empires had ended. The era of life had begun. Silas looked up at the darkening sky and saw the lights of distant worlds, knowing that on each of them, someone was looking up and seeing the same hope. He squeezed Sabrina's hand and she squeezed back, a silent vow that they would face whatever came next together. The wind whispered through the crystalline trees, a soft and welcoming sound. It was the first breath of a galaxy reborn, and it was beautiful.